Hello, everyone. We are very, very excited to have with us Brent Bellm, the CEO of BigCommerce for our Driven show. Brent, thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Thanks, Karthik. It's great to have you and team here in our Austin headquarters.
It's great. So, bachelor's at Stanford, master's at Harvard. It's like a dream for many. Looks like Brent was a very, very smart kid growing up. Is that right?
I was a very hardworking kid.
Okay.
And there's a really important difference here because I think, my success has a lot more to do with hard work and adversity than anything else. So my quick background, my mom and my dad are both from a little farming town in southern Illinois, middle of absolute nowhere, corn and soybeans. My dad grew up on a farm, and for college he wanted to study forestry of all things. Like agriculture, but for trees, and do it in the Rocky Mountains. So they moved out to the Rockies. They had me, they had my brother, they divorced, they moved back to small town Illinois. They remarried, they moved back to the Rockies, they divorced again. And then we got stuck there. My mom kind of stuck 1,000 miles away from family, trying to raise 3 kids on a very low elementary school teacher salary. We were on food stamps. We, only kept our house with assistance from the broader family. But for reasons I won't go into, we couldn't move back. And we were also in a very heavily religious community and not members of that religion. In fact, we stood out as being sort of the only people in the neighborhood who weren't. Seeing my mom struggle, seeing us struggle as a family, sort of lit a spark in me. I can think back to when I was 5 or 6. I was always a curious kid, but I also needed to create my own sense of being worth something. I didn't get that from the community I was living in. Relatives aren't around, the neighbors look down on us, and kids react to that type of situation in a variety of ways. I reacted to it by working hard and saying, well, at least in school, here's a place where I can do well and, get my math assignment done first. I cared more about getting done first than I did getting everything right. But if I could get everything right too, then that was a bonus. And, so I just worked hard in school. In the broader family, my mom, again, she's an elementary school teacher. So I got some affirmation from her that that's good, but certainly no pushing. And broader family back home in Illinois, let me know they were proud of me when I did well in school. And by the time I got to middle school, I was then kind of old and mature enough to realize that there was a way out. Like I wasn't stuck going to a local college, even if that's what everybody in my kind of high school did. Like my high school was a big but lower middle class high school. And I think in my graduating class, only 3 people went to college outside of the state,
Wow.
Including myself. So nobody else went outside the state. And there was nobody in the college or in my family saying to me, hey, you should aspire to something big. It was certainly the polar opposite of a school that would feed people into elite out-of-state colleges. But when I started looking at, all I knew is I didn't want to go to, I wanted to get out. I wanted to get away, right? I wanted to move out of state. And when I started doing my own research in the colleges, then the whole I'm going out of state. I don't know where. I can go anywhere. And I look at a number of colleges, and 2 of the 7 I applied to were in the state of Illinois, where my family was from. And I had full rides to those schools. And then my family couldn't understand why, as a poor family, I want to go to something like Stanford, where I didn't get a full ride. A lot of financial aid, but not a full ride. Just the place I wanted to go. And I'd worked hard. And when I got in, then the funny thing when I got there is I just kept doing what I did in high school. Like I felt very underprepared, not having gone to an elite school, not having come from a family of money. But what do I do in college? I just keep working hard like I did in high school. And lo and behold, I did just as well in college as I did in high school. One of the things I want to just emphasize as I look back, I think at the time I was age 15 to maybe age 22, I would have thought I didn't even go to a good high school because we were kind of lower end high school in the, in the city that I was in. And certainly it's not like a lot of the elite prep schools that people go to a Stanford or an Ivy League. I had a great education. I look back at my teachers and how they stimulated in me a love of math, a love of history. I had great teachers in subjects I didn't necessarily love. And I had mediocre teachers too. But my background combined with hard work was more than enough, not just to get in, but to then do just as well as any other person. And that's when I'm one of the big believers that the motivation of the student, the motivation I had to excel, even if it was driven by, a tough circumstance, is the biggest single thing that can enable any human being to get the most out of their human potential to accomplish, their human potential to, kind of expand their own horizons and learn and be passionate about what they learn or do with their brain or their physical skills. And number two is that's really the most important thing in school. You don't have to have schools where, they're being paid 2x, 3x, 4x the national average. You have to have teachers that care, teachers who do a good job and engage the students in the subject matter. And boy, I sure found great teachers. Not all of them, but I found great teachers at that high school. And at some point, I feel kind of obligated to go back and kind of say thanks.
Oh, it's very, very inspiring, Brent. Thanks for sharing your background. I wasn't aware of this.
That was a long story.
No, but it's really inspiring, especially for kids growing up who are from humble backgrounds. It's very inspiring. I'm just curious. I'm sure that hard work you put in and the grit, teaches you a lot of grit, and it helps in your business today. But just going to some of these big colleges, because not everybody works hard as you did. Sometimes as you grow up in life, you get a little more sense of things a little later, not as a kid. So let's say if they don't go to Harvard or Stanford, but they say, going to Harvard or Stanford really helps with connections and everything. Does that really help? And if you didn't go there, have you had the same kind of a career opportunity? What do you think?
I've got two very strong perspectives on this. Number one is I am sure that for an awful lot of people, they would tell you stories about how their connections at undergrad or, from a really elite undergrad or elite business school totally changed their life. That's not my story. That's not my experience. The jobs that I have gotten at every stage in my life had zero to do with connections I made as an undergrad, either with friends that I had or with teachers. It was all my own hard work, my own job searches, my own trying to create connections to the extent that there were connections that had a big impact on my career. They were business connections. They weren't school connections. And I'm not saying that's a story for everybody. Probably for every one person like me who has kind of done it with their own effort at each stage in their career, there's probably another 2 or 3 or 4, maybe 5, 10, who would point to at least one major step and said, oh yeah, it was this friend from undergrad or this friend from business school or this connection who made all the difference. And sure, I stay in touch with my friends from both, but they had nothing to do with the choices I have made. My friends in high school had nothing to do with it. My friends in college had nothing to do with it. My friends in business school. And part of that's just who I am. I'm an introvert, not an extrovert. I have a real obsessive commitment to the things I find interesting. And early in my career, I found first retail, store-based retail, and then when the internet came along, retail e-commerce to be the things that I really loved. And that had nothing to do with other people were going after, investment banking, or they were going after venture capital or stuff like that, right? And that wasn't what got me all excited. It was e-commerce of all things. So that's point number one. Point number two is taught me a lot. I live here in Austin, Texas now for the last 13 years. And I moved here from, more recently the Bay Area. I've lived in 4 European countries. Austin is a great place to live. There are many great places to live. Austin has a lot of business opportunity. And I would say the educational backgrounds that would help you the most in Austin are Texas-based schools. The networks here, University of Texas, A&M, TCU, SMU, Baylor, Houston, Rice, those networks are dramatically deeper, wider than the Ivy League. And there is no sense in this very thriving business community of inferiority. In fact, the opposite. If you don't have one of those degrees, somebody comes here with an Ivy degree, it's almost a liability. You got to explain yourself as not being, snobby or arrogant because of that accomplishment degree. You almost have to overcome it. You certainly don't have a network here, in my experience, that catapults you to relative success. And I think that's actually a very positive and constructive thing, because it may be quite different in the Northeast or California, where an educational pedigree is required, or at least a giant advantage in getting job opportunities. It's not going to hurt you in Austin, but it's certainly, in my opinion, not going to put you ahead of the many quality schools that are here in Texas. And okay, so what if you move to Texas and you don't have one of the Texas schools? There's nothing wrong with a degree from another, SEC school, or, an Oklahoma school, a Kansas school. I mean, you can thrive here. If you're hardworking and you're capable, you do not need those pedigrees. And that's a real breath of fresh air. I've got 3 kids, and who knows if any of them will get into an elite school. But as somebody who graduated from those, it doesn't stress me out as long as I know that they're hardworking and they're capable and they're smart. I'm certainly not going to try to micromanage my kids to the same degrees, because I wasn't micromanaged. I mean, how did I wind up there? I mean, my sister didn't even graduate from high school. My brother didn't graduate from college, right? It's not like I come from a family where this is the expectation or the norm. In fact, I'm the only person who's ever done it in my family from, elite schools like that. So I don't stress out about it, and I don't overemphasize it relative to, advising my kids and others. The most important thing in life is you figure out who you are, meaning what are your interests, what's your personality type, what makes you tick, what gets the best out of you when you work on it, and then having a work ethic applied to that. Because when you combine an intersection of your passions, your aptitudes, and hopefully a strong work ethic, you can absolutely thrive in your life, and you don't need some pedigree. Now, the pedigree won't help. It may not be an avenue for exploring all of that, but it's not the only path.
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes it could be a liability, like you said, and you always have to be willing to work hard. So thanks for that wisdom, Ben. Then let's talk business a little bit. So you're the CEO of BigCommerce, publicly traded company, and even prior to BigCommerce, you're with HomeAway, another publicly traded company as well. How is it to be a CEO of a public company? Is there a lot of pressure, or how do you deal with that?
I've always put a lot of pressure on myself, and so the pressure of being a public company is just all part of the course. I'm not somebody who wants to shy away. There is extra obligations of being a public company: SOX compliance, quarterly reporting, the real having your feet to the fire, because you have to guide Wall Street. And if you miss your numbers, then Wall Street punishes you. If you beat your numbers, then you get rewarded. There's a lot to it, but I'm a believer that the majority of things that being public brings out in the company make the company better, stronger, internally, in terms of operations, in terms of discipline, in terms of aspiration setting, goal setting. But then there are parts that are out of your control. The hardest part for us, and the big reason I wanted to be public, is that in the world of e-commerce, there are hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of e-commerce platforms around the world. And if you're a business or a partner of ours saying, I'm going to bet my company on this platform for my digital transformation, on my e-commerce future, or a partner who's saying, I'm going to devote a material percentage of our time and attention to this platform, having the credibility and transparency of a public company where you can see, oh, they've got a balance sheet with $300 million of cash on it, right? They've got whatever the number is, 16 investment bank analysts who review and rate the stock, and they all rate the company a buy or a strong market performer, right? Nobody with a sell rating. You get the transparency around your growth rates. That gives us a leg up on all of those private companies, the vast majority of the 500 plus, where they don't have that transparent credibility. That's valuable to our customers. And okay, I'm in safer hands with this company because they're public, they're strong performing, and it also helps to neutralize a disadvantage we used to have relative to the big market cap. So who are our biggest competitors? They're large market cap companies. They include Salesforce. It includes Adobe, who owns Magento. It includes SAP. It includes Shopify. Historically, it's included Oracle and IBM, though no longer. I mean, those are all very large market cap companies. And when we are ourselves public, we don't have their market cap, but we show growth rates that are, higher than in 2022. Last year, we grew 27% for the year, way above global e-commerce, which was close to zero, way above any of our public competitors. So even in a bad economy, that type of transparency can help us even relative to the large market cap competitors that we have. So I like all of that. It's not all beneficial though. I mean, as an example, any tech CEO would tell you that 2022 was a hard year because when we started 2022, very few people anticipated high inflation, high interest rates, possibility of a recession, and a total whipsaw in the public markets and private markets from years of valuing growth over profitability to now valuing profitability way ahead of growth. And you have a financial plan that's weighted towards growth over profitability. And you realize, even if you're hitting your numbers, Wall Street's not going to be happy about that because they no longer want the numbers you planned for. They now want profitability. And so that's very hard. And even though we were sort of hitting our numbers every quarter last year, and our competition, for the most part, did not, we had to kind of change our own plan going into this year and bring profitability into this year. And that's tough, but it's not any different public versus private. Had we been a private company, our investors would have demanded the exact same thing of us. It's just that doing it in the public markets and having to make big changes in how you're planning your future and managing your cost and your growth rate, it's harder to do in the public markets. That's been challenging. I found the last year more challenging than IPOing and leading through the pandemic, for example, or more challenging than we IPO'd HomeAway in 2011, and then I was there for 4 years as president COO as a public company. The last year has been more challenging as a public company than any other because, again, Wall Street just completely changed the equation for success that it values. However, I think it's probably in some ways easier to do that as a public company because as a public company, we're able to raise, before any of this happened, a very big, rounds of both equity and debt issuance. And so we had a very strong balance sheet going into all of this. And we're in strong financial shape to basically manage through all of it.
Very interesting. So for people who don't know about what BigCommerce is and why BigCommerce, what is BigCommerce and what do you guys do?
Very simply, we are an e-commerce platform. And by platform, it is the fundamental software that a business would use to create and manage its e-commerce store or stores. So your e-commerce stores can be selling to consumers. They can be selling to businesses. On BigCommerce, you can do both because we're very strong at both B2C and B2B e-commerce. And we're software as a service in that model. So you're not actually buying and licensing raw code from us. It's served up over the internet with APIs to access if you want to extend, modify, customize. But this model of software as a service makes it really easy. Like we like to think of it as enterprise e-commerce simplified. enterprise because we focus on serving complex businesses with enterprise-like needs, meaning they need to make sure that their e-commerce platform adapts to all the other technology and systems and customer segments that they serve, whatever their accounting or ERP is, whatever their marketing automation is, whatever their supply chain and order management is. And we have a lot of enterprise capabilities built in, but we simplify all that complexity. We make it faster to deploy, lower cost to manage and operate, built-in performance and security. We think that we better than anybody simplify enterprise e-commerce.
Talking about e-commerce, you also briefly touched on competition. So let's say 5-6 years ago, if you talk about e-commerce, it's mostly Adobe Commerce, the owners of Magento, and then Shopify, Big, Salesforce Commerce. And now BigCommerce is also on the reckoning. It's a force now, and you guys did some great marketing, and people talk about BigCommerce. How do you look at competition, and how do you differentiate from the competition?
Yeah, so I've been in e-commerce software since the late 90s. In fact, in 2000, 2001, I worked for one of the first ever software as a service e-commerce platform. Back when there were only maybe 5 from the 90s. It was like Yahoo Stores, Volusion, Blue Martini, and Escalate, the one I worked for. So I've believed in this software as a service model since before it was called that. When I came into BigCommerce in 2015, took over for the founders, company was 6 years old. We had risen to the number 2 platform in the world serving small businesses as a SaaS platform. But we were a long way away from number 1. Number 1 was Shopify, and they had a 5-year head start. They had already IPO'd. And as good as our platform was for small business, it could do a bunch of things Shopify couldn't, but I knew that we couldn't keep doing exactly what we were doing. And given the later start, expect to overtake Shopify, which has a very, very good platform for small business. So the day I came in, the board and the management team, part of the interview process asked me, where would you take the company as CEO? And I said, no hesitation. The day I arrive, I will announce that our target competitor is no longer Shopify. It's Magento. Magento in 2015 was the 800-pound gorilla. They probably had a 20% share of the mid-market and enterprise. They were global, they were B2C and B2B, but they were on-premise software. You bought Magento or you did the free open source version, but you had to own, manage, version, secure, upgrade, bug fix your software. And it was really hard. It was very expensive. And most companies don't want to have to do that and don't have the expense or the financials to do that, but they didn't have a choice in 2015. Why did they not have a choice? Because nobody had taken software as a service and made it as enterprise ready and open and flexible as what complex businesses needed. Not that they didn't want it, it's just nobody had done that yet. And I knew all about Magento when I was in 2010. I was in my 10th year at PayPal and eBay. I was running global product management at PayPal. And we were evaluating Magento. We had seen its rise from day one as a partner of ours. Ultimately, my boss in eBay bought Magento after I left. So I saw the whole growth and evolution of Magento. I had extreme respect for it on every dimension other than the fact that it wasn't software as a service. And I said in 2015, we're going to create the software as a service alternative to Magento. Now that took a lot of work. You can't just say we're now focused on complex businesses, mid-market and enterprise, and therefore be everything that they need. That takes time and it takes a lot of hard work and success as you manage the evolution. But what we did is we took what was kind of a monolith for SaaS in 2015, and we just very systematically decomposed it into microservices. We took each area of the product, gave it its own APIs, an ability to integrate, extend, upgrade for merchants, and just one by one kept adding first the flexibility and then the enterprise functionality on top of it. And today I would say that we're completely an enterprise solution. Forrester, Gartner, IDC, Paradigm, everybody will tell you that we're, sort of a leader or pecking on the leaderboard for enterprise capabilities, both B2C and B2B, because we have successfully done that. So that's sort of the evolution of BigCommerce. And I would say this commitment to open, we call it open commerce, this commitment to open commerce and open SaaS as the alternative to open source, which is what Magento had done. Magento was open source, right? You buy all the software and it's open to you, but you're dealing with the source code. Whereas with open SaaS, you don't get all of our source code, but it's open because of all the APIs and the flexibility, but has built-in security, built-in performance, built-in lower cost of ownership, faster deployment, all the advantages of SaaS. And now the vast majority of the benefits of what you used to have to buy, which was licensed or open source software, to get. That's sort of our positioning in the market. And it's very different than our top competitors. Those top competitors, going back to the competitor question, all compete as conglomerates. They don't believe in openness. Salesforce Commerce Cloud is a very, very small cog in the wheel of Salesforce, which is really focused on CRM and analytics and various types of CRM, sales CRM, service CRM, etc. Adobe is not Magento, and Adobe Now Commerce is a very small cog in the Adobe wheel, which is fundamentally all about a bunch of other businesses off which they make more money. Commerce was always small to Oracle and IBM when they did it. It's very small to SAP. Even Shopify, they make 70% of their revenue off of payments and merchant solutions. All these other businesses that they have added and tacked on, right? So they all compete as conglomerates, and they want their customers to buy not one but 10 products from them, or at least 5. What we learned from Magento, who became world number 1 in the on-premise software era, they did that by having the single best platform, the most open, flexible platform. And they didn't try to shove every other component or 5 other products down their customers' throats. They didn't have 5 other products. Now, they did once they got bought by Adobe, but they grew to be number 1 when they were the definition of open and flexible, right? And so for complex businesses, what are the odds that a single company's suite of products is going to be the best fit for you? In some cases, yeah. But in most cases, a big conglomerate trying to sell you a suite of services leads you to compromise in both what you get and what you pay throughout the system, right? With BigCommerce, you're going to get a lot more for what you pay for our core platform. And then you get to pick the payment solution that's best in the world for you pre-integrated. You get to pick the ERP, the marketing automation, the point of sale solution, right? All of the other points of the stack. And it's not that everybody wants to put together a best stack for their business, but I think the majority of complex businesses are better off when they do it that way, which is why Magento became bigger than all the suites. It became bigger than IBM, Oracle, SAP, right? Mm-hmm. Back in the day.
Very interesting, right? So they say good artists copy, great artists steal, Pablo Picasso. And I was fortunate enough to watch a lot of things you did starting 2015, leading into the IPO. But at that time, my learning was limited and a lot of that did not make a lot of sense to me. But now, as you IPO'd, hey, Brent did this, hey, they did that, they invested a lot in marketing. So it looks like you really executed the plan well starting 2015, leading into the IPO. Can you talk us through that journey? I mean, let's say, for example, right, you have a set of things to do, and what if you don't meet it? I mean, you actually meet things that you set to do. That's really interesting. So can you talk us through that journey leading into the IPO, and how do you do that?
Yeah, there are management books and leadership books. There are a dime a dozen. And, probably every book has some real amount of wisdom that has worked for some number of companies. So what we did isn't necessarily what other companies should do. And I run into other companies and other theorists and other leaders who will say, it's first and foremost all about culture, or it's all about execution, or it's all about strategy. I'll tell you what we did. So what I'm best at is strategy. And I came in with that strategy day one that I told you about. So first of all, in my opinion, if you execute well or have a great culture, but your strategy's wrong, if your industry's super competitive, you're doomed. You might be able to get away with an inadequate strategy in a less competitive industry, but when you have 500 plus competitors like we do, who are all trying to out execute and out culture and their way to the top, you don't have a chance unless you first have a differentiated and better strategy for a segment of the market that you're going to focus on. And so that's the first thing I do, but I'm the last person to say that strategy is more important than culture and execution. On the culture side, which is about how do you attract and get the best out of the best people you can, I was really fortunate because we already at BigCommerce were great in that regard. And I always give credit starting to, of all people, our CFO, Robert Alvarez. And despite being a CFO, he's the best culture leader I've ever worked with at any company. And he had an incredibly good culture here, the values, the energy, the ability to attract and retain wonderful human beings. That goes back to him. We needed to complement it with a real performance ethic. So now you get over to execution and operations. And, that's a continuous journey. Every function, even every leader like me is trying to get better every year. I'm not a good enough CEO for where the company needs to be in 2-3 years, right? So every function in the company, every leader in the company has to keep growing in order for the company to keep advancing. What you're good at today is what's going to keep you from getting to your full potential in the future if you keep relying on what you're already good at. You got to figure out how to get good at new things. So it's all three of those things. And I would emphasize that in an industry as really competitive as ours, it's been competitive a long time. In 2002, the year after I left that e-commerce platform Escalate from the 90s that I joined, and I went to eBay and I was explaining to eBay the reason why we shouldn't get into store platform technology at eBay. And I said, look, in 2002, I've got a list of 250 different platforms around the world that I can name. This is 2002, over 20 years ago. 250. Not a single one of them has more than 3% market share. Why? Because merchants have different needs, different category needs, functionality needs, geographic needs. There's no one size fits all. And it would be hopeless, I said, for eBay to get into this industry and expect to outcompete those 250 companies, especially when it's not even your core business. Your core business is an auction platform. It's a marketplace. You can't create some new division competing against it. It's a tough industry. And I think it has been proven that success in a competitive industry like this requires really doing well on all three dimensions. Having the right strategy, which I've explained for us, having a great culture, which I credit to Robert Alvarez, and then, executing as well as you can, but ever better at each step along the way.
Strategy, culture, execution looks like a masterclass to me, but yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's really, really interesting. So talking about commerce, you're at the forefront of what's happening in the digital revolution, and BigCommerce is at the forefront of the digital revolution that's happening not just in the US, but across the world. And we do a lot of work with distributors, and we help integrate their systems, let's say BigCommerce, with other platforms with our integration platform. How do you think that this digital revolution, how can distributors or the B2B businesses leverage the digital revolution that's happening?
Well, they really need to. B2B companies, they're slower to adopt e-commerce, but they have to, because every person who buys from them is also a consumer. And as consumers, the human beings that they distribute to, have learned all of the conveniences of buying online. I mean, during the pandemic, we were all forced to, right? We couldn't go to stores. And so every human being in most of the world has become very, very deeply aware of what e-commerce done right is like to experience. And if you are a distributor, for example, who is not giving your consumers, your customers, your business customers, a really good buying experience, you're still stuck in old paper-based offline ways that are an inconvenience, that slow them down, that cost them time, that cost them money. You are disadvantaging yourself relative to your competition, or maybe even if you don't have competition, you've got customers loyal to you. Those customers might not buy as much. They might not buy as frequently. They might not buy as widely as if you give them a really great experience. And so one of the things that I think gives us at BigCommerce a giant advantage in serving B2B companies is that, with the exception of Magento, almost all of the other B2B platforms that are out there began as B2B platforms. They don't have a B2C background. They don't have the business to consumer front-end design tools that we have. They don't have the consumer experience optimization mindset that we have. And so when we bring that to B2B, we're also bringing all of the capabilities that many of the world's best and biggest brands use on BigCommerce to your option set for your B2B selling. And then, for example, our new buyer portal that we just launched a couple weeks ago, early May 2023, we're getting feedback from our agency partners that it is the best buyer portal user experience that they've ever seen in a B2B platform. It's incredible. So we're bringing in a lot of B2B functionality native into a platform that also has all the attributes of world-class B2C. And that makes it so much easier, faster, and more effective for a B2B company to create a great buying experience, but with the capabilities that are required in B2B. Company permissions, order lists, purchase order capabilities and invoicing, all this B2B specific functionality that you have to have in there too.
Very interesting. So they just have to get out there and try different things and experiment. And you talked about strategy. I have a follow-up question on that as well. So let's say for a distributor out there who wants to improve on their strategy, or for anyone for that matter, let's say they're not really good at strategy. How can you improve yourself on strategy?
Oh boy, that's a long question. And I'm going to try to give you a succinct answer. I started my career in strategy. So the first job I ever got was out of college, and then back after business school was as a management consultant. And I quickly found retail and focused on retail management consulting. Straight out of college, I didn't have any experience. I mean, I could do numbers really well and I could do analysis really well, which was my role on teams. I was an analyst. I wasn't really telling the companies what to do. I was analyzing what my bosses told companies to do, or analyzing the customer's business. In my experience, the key to doing strategy well always begins with a deep understanding of who your customer is, what your customer most needs, and how to do that differently and better than what anybody else is doing. It starts with the customer. It doesn't start with market sizes and outside-in analysis. You have to understand your customer really well and keep learning from your customer. It's not always that your customer can tell you what it is they want. I mean, Steve Jobs famously said, "Why would I ask the customer what the customer wants? Only I can tell them," And that's what the great visionaries can do. That's if you're creating a new market in a new area, a new product, like Steve Jobs did so famously. Regardless, so you have to know your customer. And you either have to ask the customer and understand what they're looking for. You have to imagine something and then go test it on them and see, is this the right, portable music player for you? Is this the right portable phone concept? Starts with the customer. And really understanding your competition. You got to do something a lot better and different than they do.
Yeah, start with the customer and do better than your competition. That's cool. Talking about the distribution businesses and even distributors in general, one of the challenges they have is they have a great site and they are always marketing the site. hey, this is the site, just go to this website, and yeah, it's all great. But then the orders don't take place online. So what do you think distributors can do there? Or sometimes, one of the concerns distribution businesses have, even when I talk to some distributors, is even today, some distributors do not have an e-commerce store. And some of them tell me that, hey, we tried e-commerce, but then we're not getting enough orders, so we don't really want to invest on that.
Yeah.
What have you got to say for that?
Couple things. So the first is, even if you create a good website, how do you get traffic to it? How do people know about it, right? If your existing customers aren't forced to go there and they've got old ways of doing business with you, they may not themselves go there because you haven't forced them to. So insight number one is that, and we'll take it from the world of B2C. Insight number one is that when we look across our customers around the world, mature businesses usually, more of them are not digital natives. They've been around for years, decades, offline before online. Today, if we look at their transactions in any given month, roughly half of them last click source from a third-party website. The customer did not go straight to the merchant's URL. The customer got there starting on a search engine or an affiliate site or a display ad or a content site or a social network. They're coming in from a third-party website. And so a big part of the game in succeeding in B2C, and for some B2B sellers, is what we call omni-channel. And omni-channel is your ability to get your products and your store or brand distributed to the places on the web where your target customers most likely spending time and may even be looking for products like yours, okay? And that's why we bought a business called Feedonomics. They are the world leader for enterprises, basically feeding their product catalogs optimally into Google, Microsoft, and the search engines. Because remember, in the search engines, it used to all be about SEO. SEO is where they're crawling your website and looking for the keywords they want. But now SEO is pushed way down the page. If you're on Google and somebody does a shopping search, it's going to be Google Shopping first, and then paid ads, or in other places, they also have free ads and listings now. And the only way to get into Google Shopping or to really perform in these pages is you have to feed your catalog in. If you don't do that, you can't even appear, right? And it's going to be all your competition. So that's how Google works. Facebook, TikTok, social networks have their own schema where they need product catalogs fed in optimally in order to do things like retargeting, lookalike targeting, selling, affiliate networks. You have to feed your catalog in. You need to optimize that. Feedonomics is what does that. And so that is part of the game. And that's relevant to any B2B distributor too. If you are looking for your products to appear on third-party websites, and they also do marketplaces, so 180 marketplaces, and there may be B2B marketplaces, distributor marketplaces, just like there are marketplaces like Amazon, right? Are you trying to sell on Amazon B2B through their marketplace, et cetera? So that is the first lesson, is just designing a good site isn't enough. You need to get people to it. And you need to do that at the best return on ad spend you can. Okay. The second is then once they go there, you need to convert them. And converting has everything to do with, have you actually provided a buying experience that is better than the offline alternatives? If you haven't, meaning, let's say that you're forcing the company to pay with credit cards and they don't pay with credit cards, or vice versa. You only let them pay with credit cards and they want to do an invoice or purchase order and you don't support that. You have to have the key characteristics that your purchasers need to facilitate both the creation of the order or the shopping cart and then the actual checkout. What if you're selling complex orders and you want to load it with 300 items into a shopping cart? Can the shopping cart handle 300 items? Most shopping carts can't. Ours used to not be able to, but it can now, right? You can get zero conversion when fundamentally your own e-com platform can't handle, what it is you're trying to sell. So the right buyer portal, the right checkout and payment options, the right permissions options, it has to work with the permissions, the order process permissions of your buyers. All that has to be built in order for the site to convert. Now, let's say you do all that optimally, and for some crazy reason, your customers, you're getting target customers to your website. You've got the products you want for sale there with a good customer experience. You're giving them the tools they need to actually check out and purchase the way their businesses need to do it, and they're still not converting there. Show me that customer. I think it's pretty darn rare. When you check those boxes and you don't get substantial conversion of offline to online purchasing. Now, we do have businesses who really use BigCommerce not even as, they use this for brochureware first and foremost,
Sure.
right? They're still so, for whatever reasons, dedicated to offline purchase behaviors due to channel conflict, due to regulatory, due to whatever. They'll use us simply as brochureware, right? This is how their customers go and find out what's available for sale. And in some cases, I'll give you an example. GE Appliances, one of the biggest appliance brands, obviously, in the United States. I believe that their site, for the most part, is not transactional because they designed it to support their channels, their third-party B2B and B2C sellers. And so the site's designed to help you figure it out, whether you're a consumer or a business buyer, what product you want to order, and then get to the channel seller. So that can be a way of doing business if you're still not comfortable going direct to your customer for whatever business reason. Some they won't for regulatory reasons. They're like, well, we can't do this online for HIPAA compliance reasons, or if you're in pharmaceuticals or something. In some cases, they will just have to have the transaction still go offline or outside of the website. However, I think for the most part, it's a false argument when people say, oh, I can't get them to convert through my website. You do those three things right. You've got a great design, an experience on the front end of your products for sale. You do omni-channel right, you get customers to it, and then you give them the purchasing tools, permissions, payment methods, you name it, order histories, to buy, to check out conveniently. Show me an example of a company who doesn't then shift an awful lot of their purchasing to online. That would surprise me.
Very interesting, right? So again, e-commerce is not just about sales too. It's also about customer support. Hey, the customer doesn't have to call; they can just look through the site and find the information they need, like you said. I mean, BigCommerce has invested a lot in B2B, and you talked about strategy. You were very smart about that. Hey, do a lot of investments in B2B, and you continue to do that. It's really interesting. So where can customers, right? Let's say a distributor watching this, if they want to learn some of this stuff, do you guys offer any learning for distribution or B2B? Hey, how can you be better at this? Some of the things you talked about and more. Is there something you guys offer for that?
We have some, but we can do more and get better at it. We tend to rely more on our agency partners to be the real instructors, because we're a software company. We're not an agency that implements on behalf of our customers. We help the agency and the customer on the technical side of implementation, but we don't do strategy, we don't do design, we don't do systems integration. That's what our partners do. And so they're really the front lines that are gonna coach, handhold our shared customers to successful implementation. And 80% of our enterprise customers do in fact use a third-party agency to assist them. Our software is actually easy enough to use that 20% will do it themselves, but 80% of the time they're going to use an agency, and we really look to them to be the lead educators. And then there are also industry experts and specialists who that's their job too, who are putting out great content. As an example, Andy Hoare at Paradigm, he's kind of the authority in B2B e-commerce platform technology, and he evaluates the leading platforms in his annual combine. And he's out there educating companies on how to do this right. And it's great. I think oftentimes a third-party expert who's not speaking on behalf of a single solution like BigCommerce, but speaking in general on how to think about success in e-commerce and which solutions to use depending on your needs. that's even more valuable to the market than our creating a bunch of stuff that's proprietary to us. That said, I think we have the platform for B2B. If you go into G2, which is where the world's businesses rate their software, and you look under e-commerce platform and you click B2B. So it's just B2B sellers rating their e-com platform. We're the leader globally, most popular and highest rated. Okay. So we've got an awful lot of success behind us as rated by customers who love our software.
So talking about partnerships, one thing I really love about BigCommerce is you guys do your partnerships really well, and you have been investing on that quite a lot. So talk to us about your partnership strategy and how do you look at partners? And let's say if somebody partners with BigCommerce, how can it be a win-win?
Yeah. So it really, our partner centricity and focus comes down to three things. Number one is our open strategy. I told you earlier, we don't want to be a conglomerate or a suite that sells all in one, 5 different products, plus a whole bunch of services for millions of dollars. That's not what we want to be. We want to be the opposite to that. We want to be a 1 or 2 product company, the best in the world at core e-commerce platform. But that then means customers are looking to partners of ours for everything else, right? What's the best payments for me? Best marketing automation? What ERP? What integration layer? So we need to have an ecosystem of the best, a range of the best partners built into what we do in order to succeed at our strategy of being open, right? It's not just about being open. We need to have those partners pre-integrated. We learned a lot from Magento, who, like I said, back before they were Adobe, were the global leader. They had the biggest marketplace in the world of extensions and integrations. And when we said we're going to take on Magento, we're going to do that too, but we're going to make it way easier than them because we're SaaS, right? We don't just want plugins. We want multi-tenant SaaS single-click app integrations. The integration isn't a cartridge that you then have to turn on and secure and enable. It's a multi-tenant SaaS integration through APIs. You just have to sign up for the partner product and now you're using it because it's already integrated, right? So there's the learning from them. And then the third part that's just very important to us and how we approach partners, it's with the same culture externally that we have internally. Austin is a very friendly, open city. We're headquartered in Austin, Texas. Our culture is one of being very friendly and open and fun and collaborative. And we just naturally take that to our partner ecosystem. And what our partners often tell us is they love working with the people more than they like working with the people from any other company. We try harder. We try to make it more fun. We try to make it more win-win and collaborative. And we do that each and every day. That stems from our culture.
Talking about people, that's another big asset for BigCommerce, I would say, because everybody we talk to, they're very friendly, and not just that, they're very great at their work. What tips would you give for someone, in terms of hiring, right? So what is your hiring strategy, or give us some hiring tips?
I don't want to, I'm nervous to answer that because it's not like there's a company philosophy and everybody does that with a cookie cutter thing. And what I look for is very different than what even my other management team members look for. And that's good because otherwise we'd all be asking the same question, getting the same answer. What I will say for me personally, and I'm not saying this is the right generalization, I'm the opposite of a lot of interviewers. I don't create a checkbox list for each job that we're hiring for and systematically interview for people who check the boxes. I can get most of that from a resume, right? Do you have that experience or not? That's not how I interview. I go back to something I said at the beginning of this podcast. I'm trying to figure out what makes each person tick. What, if any, for this human being, this candidate for this role, is the intersection between their biggest passion, their best aptitudes, and in their experience, that does this person have a superpower? If so, what is it? How impactful has that been at this person's prior companies? How impactful would that be in this role at this company? Okay. And then you also then want to figure out, okay, that person comes in with this superpower. What are the things that aren't superpowers? Does that leave us with gaps relative to what we need? And you're trying to figure out, like, there's not a single puzzle piece that fits into your puzzle, right? The people that you might hire into any given role could come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. And what puzzle piece they bring in might fit just as well as some other one, but in a very different way. And I'm trying to say, okay, for that human being, what really is special about them? How much would that make a difference at this company? And then how do we compensate for the things that this person isn't, necessarily going to be amazing at? Can we? Right? And so I'm always really open-minded and trying to explore what's special about that person. And the last thing I'm doing is presuming that there's a single mold that somebody has. It's the same way why one of the things I've really learned a lot from. Companies historically used to say a lot about hiring for cultural fit. Mm-hmm. That's a really bad mindset, because if you believe that there's a single culture and a single type of fit, you're going to not create diversity. You're going to create a monoculture, right? What you're looking for is cultural adds, right? You're looking for somebody who, for their individuality, not just are they going to fit into the culture, meaning not be antagonistic to it, but what are they going to add to it? And what they add is usually not how they fit in, but how they're different, right? And it's that difference, whether it's a skill set, the superpower of an individual, on the capability side, which we call bucket one, your bucket one capabilities for the job, or bucket two is what is the cultural side. And on the cultural side, I'm not looking for fit, I'm looking for add.
That's awesome. Yeah, what problem you're solving and continuous learning. Yeah, that's great. So we've been partners for a long time. And we learn a lot from BigCommerce. So how does working with DCKAP or companies like DCKAP help BigCommerce?
Well, we would be dead in the water without partners like you. Again, I go back to the two things I said earlier. On the agency side, 80% of our enterprise customers need to work with a great agency to help them implement. They're not experts in digital transformation, and they need somebody who makes it faster, easier, and more successful for strategy, for design, for integration, for implementation. 80% of them need great agencies. And so we want to work with the very best agencies, so that all of our customers are as successful as possible. That's on the agency side. On the technology side, again, I talked about the fact that we're about open SaaS and open commerce, which means we're the core platform, but we're not trying to be any other things. We need technology solutions that do everything else, that do payments, do point of sale, that do ERP, marketing, site tools, shipping, fulfillment, order management. There's so many categories that are in our apps and technology marketplace, which has now more than 1,000 integrations in it. And so we're looking for partners to do all of that. We want to have the best solutions in every category already in our apps marketplace, so our customers don't have to do that integration work.
No, it's great. Essentially, you have a great ecosystem built, and then there's a technology which solves that problem. So we come in and plug into the ecosystem and solve the problem. It's great. A few last questions, Brent. Let's say if you had to redo your whole career again, is there anything you would do differently?
No, it's not that I haven't made mistakes. I've made plenty of mistakes. If anything, ironically, I would have looked back. I'll give you an example. So very simply, when I think about the answer to that question, everything in life is path dependent, right? Every time you make a decision, it changes then experiences and possibilities and outcomes after it. And, it's like if you get like one of the pachinko balls or whatever it's called, you drop a ball on the top and then you just start hitting all these little bars and you wind up somewhere very different. I'm 51 years old and I look at where I am today in my career. Would I gamble on a different outcome by making a different choice somewhere else? And I say, no, I'm really excited about where I am in life. I'm excited about the company I'm running and where we can go. I'm excited about my family and my wife and my kids. Even if we're never in as good a shape as we optimally could be, I'm excited about my personal interests. I'm also humbled by things that, I can and should do better as a friend, as a father, as a husband, as a leader at BigCommerce. But would I gamble on a different outcome by having changed something earlier in my life? I would not. And as an example, when you think you've made a really big mistake. So when I joined Escalate at the very beginning of 2000, just moved out to California, and I made my first really big career bet after 6 years in retail and e-commerce consulting. And that company ended up not making it. Like a year into it, I'm like, we're not succeeding right now. I made a bad decision. I got to cut my losses after a year and start over again and try a different company. And for years and years and years, I look back on that year as like the worst year of my career. It's not fun to be part of a startup that's not succeeding. I also happened to blow my knee out like 7 days on the job skiing. So I dealt with multiple knee surgeries and trying to commute in the height of the bubble with a reconstructed knee. I mean, it was a tough year for me. And I kept looking back and saying, well, that was my career mistake. But that experience I got that year at a general SaaS e-commerce platform was then essential to what I did at eBay, what I did at PayPal. Wasn't necessarily so helpful at HomeAway. And then I come into BigCommerce, which is a company doing the exact same thing. And the fact that I'd already done this before and failed at it and know how easy it is to fail in such a competitive industry and how hard it is to succeed, I came in very sober and rational about what it needed to succeed. And so I look back at the biggest mistake of my career, which was joining a startup that then didn't succeed. But it was instrumental to things that ended up working out later. That experience, would I have been a qualified CEO of BigCommerce if I had not done that? They might have hired me on paper, but that 1 year of failure gave me so much experience that I couldn't have had if I had spent that year doing anything else. So that's my personal answer to that question. It's a hard thing to do though, because when you say to somebody, like, what's your biggest regret? What would the thing you do over? You just have to realize that if you go back in time and change that, you wind up in a very different place today, and you don't know whether it's better or worse. It'll certainly be different.
Awesome. That's great. And for an entrepreneur or a CEO or anybody watching this who's running a private company, and if they have aspirations, or if they want to take the company public, what advice would you give them as someone who's not done it once but twice? What would your advice be for them?
Well, as a lot of folks would tell you, it's not all, roses and gardens. It's a lot of hard work. The discipline of being a public company is unrelenting. You are in the public eye nonstop. If something goes wrong, it's hard to recover from it. And so you've got to be open to that discipline. You've got to be open to embracing the scrutiny and the pressure, the discipline required to really excel. And make sure that you're open to that. Because if you're not, as an entrepreneur, then your options are to stay private. Your options are to bring in a CEO who is up for that challenge. But that's not trivial. That's not trivial. First, you got to decide if you want it and can do it, right? There are a lot of people in their careers who aspire to get certain jobs or certain promotions or certain responsibilities. But those jobs, promotions, responsibilities don't go back to the thing I said earlier. They're not well aligned with the individual's, what makes the person tick in terms of passion and what's their aptitude, right? You need to make sure that that's lined up with who you are as a CEO or entrepreneur. And then getting there, look, lots of people can tell you what it takes to be ready. Size of company, profitability, market opportunity size, your differentiation. And there's some companies who will IPO but not really have the long run opportunity to continue being a strong, successful grower and therefore a long-term successful public company. And there are plenty of private options that can be good for those companies too. So make sure you want it, make sure you can do it yourself, and make sure your company, if you go public, has a big enough market opportunity for long-term success and viability.
Great. Thank you for that. And you look very fit. So I was reading that you also bike, you cycle, I would say 50 miles over the weekend. Is that right? And how did you pick up that hobby?
That would be that'd be an off weekend. Like normally on the weekends, like a Saturday ride for me, 60 to 100 miles.
Wow.
And then Sunday, there's another shorter ride that I will do. I found 28 years ago. 28 years ago when I was in business school, I decided I'm going to run my first marathon. I've got 2 years. That's one of the things I want to do in business school. And for the first time ever in my life, I got to a level of endurance fitness that I had never had before. And I noticed how good it made me feel, not just physically, but more important, emotionally. Like absent endurance exercise, the stresses of studies at the time, work, you name it, would get bottled up. I didn't have a release for the stress. And that can lead to an emotional roller coaster during the times when stress gets high. When I started running, all of a sudden I had a physical outlet for the stress. My brain would work on things that were bugging me. I'd sweat it out. And my emotional stability dramatically improved. That's my silver bullet. Exercise is my silver bullet for handling the emotional ups and downs of a lot of responsibility. So I don't bring stress home for the most part to my family, right? And I don't bring it to work either. I have that outlet of endurance. And for many years it was marathon running, ultra marathon running. I did Ironman triathlons for a handful of years. But then because of that set of knee surgeries I told you about, ultimately I had to switch from running as the primary sport to cycling, which has been the last decade. So now it's cycling. It's no more than an hour a day pre-work during the work week, and then it's longer on the weekend. But that's my outlet. And I'm a real advocate for people. Different people can have different outlets, maybe it's meditation, maybe it's yoga, maybe it's socializing with friends. It could be a hobby like woodworking, gardening, but I think everybody needs to find that outlet that is their stress relief. It could be pets. I don't know, right? but mine is now cycling. And for 28 years, it's been endurance exercise. And
so that's great. So you cycle 1 hour a day, every day?
Monday through Friday, 3 days I cycle for an hour. 1 day I run for an hour. Wow. And 1 day I lift weights for an hour. Not that you would look at me and tell.
So you do it in the morning or evening? I'm just curious.
Always in the morning. Always before work.
Before work.
Yeah.
Great, Brent. It's been great.
If you do it in the evenings, then it's harder to sleep because your body, is having to pump a lot of blood. Well, you want it to be sleeping, but repairing the muscles. And if you do it in the morning, two things are good about it. One is you've got all day for the body to be repairing itself so that you can sleep better at night. But then number two is there are a bunch of brain and emotional enhancements that happen, especially in those couple of hours after exercise. You're going to be extra sharp. Blood's flowing. You're extra sharp those first couple of hours.
Great. What time do you go to bed and what time do you get up?
I go to, I've become a huge believer in sleep. Like a lot of people, I once upon a time systematically got too little. I try to get 8 hours every night, even though I think my body really needs more like 8.5 to 9. So I'm still not getting as much as I need.
Sure.
But since the pandemic, just getting to 8 a night. And I know I need more because it's my alarm that wakes me up in the morning. It's not my body. But I try to get 8. And a typical time I'll go to bed is 10:30, wake up 6:30, or 10:40, wake up 6:40, which is also well aligned with when our 3 kids for each of their schools needs to get up. My wife would not be happy if I were getting up before that. Some people are early risers, but oh boy, neither would I like, nor would that be good for my marriage.
Great. So I'd like to end with this question, Brent. What book are you reading right now?
Okay, so I read about 50% fiction, 50% nonfiction. And I do get to read a lot of books because, I talked about cycling during the week, but usually a couple of those morning times or workouts inside on a trainer. And unlike a lot of other people, I have the ability to just set my program workout on erg mode, where my smart trainer is forcing me to do all the right amount of work, for each minute of the workout. And I'm reading a book or a magazine while I'm on it. Even if I'm doing a high intensity interval training, I'm reading a book or a magazine while I'm doing those workouts. So I actually get through a lot of books. And the two books I'm reading right now, the nonfiction book is Theodore Rex, the second book in I think there were 3 of them, written about Teddy Roosevelt. It's a 1,000-page book, small print. So it's going to take me a long time to read it. But I've already read the first book about Teddy Roosevelt. He's such a fascinating character. That's my nonfiction book I'm reading right now. And the fiction book is called The Great Fire. It's by an Australian author, Shirley Hazard, who I hadn't even heard about, but for 20 years plus, I've subscribed to a magazine called Bookmarks that sort of reviews the reviews of books that come out. And it's not just current releases, but sometimes it will go back and talk about great authors and their body of work. And in the most recent issue of that, it talked about Shirley Hazard, this Australian author I hadn't heard of. But then I read about some of her books and I'm like, oh, I'd like to try one of those. So that's how I picked The Great Fire. It's kind of right after, post-World War II. And I don't know, maybe 30 pages into it. But The Great Fire was sort of, I think it's referring to the dropping of the atomic bomb in Japan, or the 2 of them, and then the after effect of that and the world after that.
It's interesting. And I said one last question, but I have a follow-up on this. So reading fiction, they say it really helps you as a CEO, or does it really help? Or what do you think? Does it help business, reading fiction?
Oh, I don't know. I just do it because I enjoy great fiction.
Sure.
And not all the fiction I read is great. I try to only read great fiction, but even my hit rate, of the stuff I choose to read, maybe only half of it do I end up loving the books.
Yeah.
But just having that diversity of exposure to great stories and great way that people tell stories, I enjoy it. And then some great fiction changes how you view the entire world. Like, there are books for me like Don Quixote and The Lord of the Rings, which to me just have such unbelievable joy, wisdom, fun, creativity embedded in them. I remember reading Don Quixote, which was written in the early 1600s. It's regarded as maybe the first great novel of the world, on plane flights and just laughing out loud. I don't think most people would find it as hilariously comical as I do. Maybe back in the 1600s you would, but man, I laughed my way all through Don Quixote. I love that book.
Interesting. Yeah, that's great. That's great, Brent. I'm reading Benjamin Franklin's biography by Walter Isaacson.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great book too, and it's a big one. But Brent, I really, really enjoyed interviewing you. It's a great learning, and there were a lot of great nuggets as well. So thank you so much for taking your time. Nice office here at the BigCommerce headquarters. So thanks a lot, Brent.
Oh, my pleasure, Karthik.
Yeah.
Thanks to everybody who tunes in and didn't tune out before we were done.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Driven Podcast. Check out our other episodes for more and subscribe to be the first to access every new episode.